From Boston, Crockett's Victory Garden.
Welcome to Crockett's Victory Garden. I'm Jim Crockett, and in this part of the country, fall has officially begun. And it's time for us to think about soil preparation for next year's garden. But before we get to the soil preparation, let me tell you what we're going to do today. Those paper white narcissus that I've been expecting for the last couple of weeks have finally arrived. We're going to plant some late vegetables in a cold frame. Then we're going to take cuttings of several house plants, and we'll show you how to root those in the greenhouse. Now let's go back here to this soil preparation in an area where we had corn, several crops of corn in here this year. It's a little late in this particular section to grow many more crops out of doors. And so what I'm going to do is to do, I think, the most important operation of all gardening, and that is work on soil preparation. I think nearly all of the questions that I get on soil prep, on gardening, are related way back to good soil preparation. They'd never have you all wouldn't have your problems if you prepared the soil properly in the beginning. Now, I tested this soil. Although we put lime on it last fall, and we put lime on it again this spring, it's still, by now, with the rain and irrigation this summer, this has gone down to about 5.5 pH, which means it's too acid for good crops to grow. What I'm going to do now is to add lime, ground limestone, just plain ground limestone at the rate of about 35 to 50 pounds to 1,000 square feet, 3.5 to 5 pounds to 100 square feet. Make it look as though there had been a very light snowfall. Just like that across the soil. We'll eventually do this whole area, but this will be enough to show you what we're going to do to put on lime. Now, if you live in the western part of the country where the soil is already very alkaline and you'd like to lower the alkalinity, add sulfur instead of lime. Now, we're going to dig this lime into the soil. You don't have to be very particular about this. Just 2 or 3 inches deep is good enough. Makes the soil preparation for this particular crop at this time of year relatively easy. Now, when we get the winter rains, and they'll start to meld that lime into the soil, and the sweetness will take effect way down deep in the ground. Well, if you've heard me say it once, you've probably heard it a dozen times, that the best thing that you can put in your soil is organic matter. The cheapest way to put in organic matter is to grow your own. Well, I'll show you how we're going to grow ours. We're going to use a plant known as winter rye. Now, this is the same rye from which rye bread is made. We're going to sow these seeds on the surface of the soil. They'll grow all winter long, even. If the temperature gets up as much as 40 degrees, they'll begin to grow. Next May, when it's 1.5 feet tall, we'll dig this into the ground and add this marvelous organic matter which makes gardens grow. Well, to make the ryegrass grow, I'm also going to put some 10-10-10 fertilizer. It's a plain, ordinary chemical fertilizer, but it will give these plants a fast boost, and will feed them from now until late in the fall. Now notice that when I'm putting on the ryegrass, put on plenty of seeds. Now we just can't afford to be stingy on this, because every one of those plants that comes up will make 4 or 5 stems. Then all we have to do is to just rake it lightly like that. They will come right up in 4 or 5 days. Some of them on top of the surface. Don't worry about them. We get a little rain, a little water, and they will begin to grow anyway. Now let's go to the cold frame. We'll plant some vegetables to harvest late this fall. First of all, let's look at the cold frame. Let's tip this up for you. You can see it's nothing but a wooden box made of 1/2-inch plywood, exterior plywood. You notice it's wobbly because the corners are held together with hinges that have pins in them, so they can be pulled, and this whole thing can be dismantled in a matter of a minute or so. But what we're going to do now is to prolong our growing season. There's no reason why we can't have 2 months of extra growing season by having this kind of thing. That's 2 extra months in the fall, a couple of extra months in the spring. Let's go through the year-round use of a cold frame. I feel that it's kind of the poor man's greenhouse. Even though you have a greenhouse, it may be even more reason that you should have a cold frame. At this time of year, we're going to grow some vegetables until late. In the wintertime, the cold frame is the place to put your spring flowering bulbs so that you can go out in the middle of the winter, take some of those back into a windowsill and have them blossom for you in midwinter. In the early spring, it's the place you put your seedlings to toughen up so that the transition from your windowsill or greenhouse to the outdoor garden isn't too abrupt. In the summertime, you've seen me sow this seeds in a place such as this in a protected environment. This is my summertime seed bed. So this is a kind of a 4-season adjunct to good gardening. Well, today I'm going to begin by planting some lettuce seeds. And I want the plants to go 8 inches apart, so I'm using what we might call a multiple dibble, these little pegs on a board 8 inches in each direction. All we have to do with this is just tip it upside down like that, barely press it in because I don't want the seeds to go in more than a 1/2 inch. All I want to do is just about mark the spot. Now for lettuce, I'm using the variety called Buttercrunch. Now Buttercrunch is a very select variety. It takes about 60 days to mature. This is all we do. Drop 3 or 4 seeds there, 3 or 4 seeds along like this. That's all we do. We just pull a little soil over the top of them and pack them down. Now those seeds will be up in about a week's time. We'll choose the strongest plant at each place and simply pull out the others and throw them away. So here we'll have our lettuce planted. The next one is radishes. Now I'm going to plant radish seeds in this little corner of the bed, and you notice that I am not making rows. I'm just going to scatter the seeds on the surface like that. We'll cover them up later. I'm going to put in, that one is called Cherry Belle, a nice red one. I'm going to put in a few of this one known as French Breakfast. This is a red and a white variety. Scatter a few of those in. They'll all be ready to pick in just about a month. Now what we'll do here is cover them with a little sand, soil, sifted soil, to cover them, pat them down. We're going to plant some beets up in here, but I have to get over and show you what happened to our spinach. Last week, I said that the spinach this week would be ready for thinning to stand at 6-inch intervals. Well, you can imagine how I felt when I came in here today and found that this spinach, because of hot weather, has started to go to seed. Well, that's no way to have a good spinach crop. This is perfectly edible, very, very delicious and very tender and young. So what I'm going to do is come right along here. I'm going to harvest this spinach. Perfectly great to put in the kitchen. But if I were to leave it here in the garden, this would be the end of it. It would just go to seed and we would not have a good crop. I want to go right down these rows and pull out this. Now eventually this afternoon we'll do this whole row and we're going to plant some more spinach. There's no reason why we can't continue to plant spinach. Now that's really is beautiful spinach, and we've caught it at the stage that it's still nice and tender. Now I'm going to take some 10-10-10 fertilizer. We'll just refresh the nourishment in this soil a little bit, like that. And we'll use a cultivator, dig up the soil, just loosen it a bit, and we'll get another crop going in here. No reason why you can't plant spinach just as late in the fall as you can move the soil. The plants themselves will live over winter, will be the first things to grow in the spring if they're not big enough to harvest in the fall. So, level that fairly well. Use my planting board here We'll line those up somewhat, make a little trench, and we're ready to sow some more spinach. Now the variety I'm putting in now is one called Cold Resistant Savoy. I'd like to put the seeds approximately an inch apart. We can't really tell, half an inch on a windy day, it's hard to be sure, but we'll eventually thin these to 3 inches and then to 6 inches. We'll have, what we do, you see we'll put in a double row of spinach. Again, the covering over process, about a ½ inch deep, like so. Pat them down. They'll be up in just a few days, and we'll have our spinach crop. We will have a spinach crop here, regardless of the fact that we had some warm weather, because we don't expect much more warm weather this fall. Let's look for a minute at a perennial phlox. This is the one called the garden phlox, a variety known as Prince George, and truly a beautiful garden phlox. Now this is one which is propagated from root cuttings, and later on this fall I will dig some of the roots and show you how you could have hundreds of plants from this one. But I have some other plants we're going to propagate today from stem cuttings rather than root cuttings. And the first one is this beautiful little plant here, known as the lavender cotton. Now the lavender cotton is not cotton and it's not lavender. It's gray foliage. Sometimes it has little yellow flowers on it. This is not quite hardy in New England. And so what I'm going to do is to make a lot of new plants. I'll slip those in my cold frame this winter so they'll live through. Next spring I can plant them out in here. Well, there is another phlox down here which we can grow from stem cuttings very easily. Excuse me. This is known as the Carolina phlox. You see a bumblebee out here enjoying the blossoms. Now we pinched back the dead flower heads, to cut off the dead flower heads along in July. This plant began to blossom in June. It's been blossoming now for 3 months, because after the first taking off of the dead flower heads, we got all of these new ones. Now we're getting, in addition to the flower heads, this kind of growth. Now this growth does not have the potential for making flowers. This is just vegetative growth, and perfectly great for making stem cuttings such as this. Now what we'll do is take a few of these along into the greenhouse. Now while I'm right down at this area, excuse me, I want to talk about the plant which is called edelweiss. Now this is a Swiss plant, comes from the Alps. A lot of people think of this in song and such. The plant itself is not very showy. You can see at this time of the year the rather lax little gray-green leaves. It has a very strange, small, yellowish flower in midsummer that looks like a little puff of wool on top of the stem. And then it makes a seed. The seed here looks something like a miniature dandelion. But those seeds will grow, and here you see some plants which I grew from seeds from this very plant, set out a couple of months ago. All of these little plants are the edelweiss. Now every nursery and seed company doesn't carry it, but you can find it in seed catalogs. That's the edelweiss, and I know of a half a dozen or more different companies that sell it. Well, let's go from here. We'll go into the greenhouse, but a couple of more things I want to show you while we're in the garden. One is I want to talk about endive. Now, if you've been watching this program all year, you remember that this spring I planted some endive in this very row. In the latter part of May or the 1st of June, they were enormous plants, and we started to blanch them. We laid a board across here, and about the time we did that, we hit a spell of 100-degree temperatures, and these plants went to seed. And that is one of the hazards of growing endive in the springtime. Growing them in the fall, with the days getting progressively cooler, they don't make seeds, but the foliage itself is still rather bitter. What I'm going to do is to blanch it. Just reach like that. Make a little top knot with a twist them around it like so. Now the center of this plant will of course be deprived of sunshine. The leaves will turn creamy white. They'll lose their bitterness. They'll just have that nice tang that you expect from endive. Now I want to straddle this row of beans just to give you an idea of how beans should be grown. Grow great quantities of seeds in the row. Now this is that marvelous variety known as Italian Romano, a broad podded bean, a distinctive flavor and perfectly delicious. Now it's too late to plant more beans, but in this part of the country here, but we will be harvesting beans from this for at least a month, perhaps longer. You can see we still have blossoms, we still have little beans coming. The secret is to keep picking the beans while they're young and tender. Now there's one more plant we want to pick before we go in to make some cuttings. And that plant is that marvelous herb called basil. Now you might be tempted, if you have basil growing in your garden, to go right out and dig up the plant such as this. But you notice how that stem is just hard and woody. If you were to dig that up and try to crowd it in the flower pot, all the lower leaves would fall off and it would just be a mess. You can, if you want to, save the seeds. Now here's one coming into flower. Just you can see the flowering stem. That eventually would set seeds. You could save those and grow them from seeds or buy seeds. But what I'm going to do today is simply grow some from cuttings. And I wish you could enjoy the fragrance that I'm getting from this particular plant right now. We just take cuttings of these tender young stems. They'll root in a matter of a week or 10 days. Those can go on a sunny windowsill and they will be nice all winter long. Now we're going in the greenhouse. Now in the material I'm going to use for rooting the cuttings today happens to be sand. But I've had many a person write to me and say, I've seen you use sand sometimes, sometimes you're using perlite, sometimes vermiculite. What's best? Well, you know, there really isn't a best way to do everything in gardening, but there are many, many good ways. I'm going to use sand. This is plain builder's sand. It's the kind of sand that a gardener says talks back to him. Now you listen, I'm going to just crunch this in my fingers and see if you can hear the coarseness of the gravel. Now that coarse gravel is what allows the water to drain through and the air to get in. You won't get roots on a plant if you can't get some air down into the rooting medium. So we have damp sand, not beach sand, but builder's sand. I'm going to simply make a couple of little trenches along here, 2 or 3 inches apart, in which to set my cuttings as we go. This is the easy way to root great numbers of cuttings. Well, let's begin with the basil. It happens to be right here on the top. What we want to do is to be sure that we don't cover any leaves underneath the soil. I'm going to take out the tip of this like that, and we'll have a basil cutting with about 1 inch of stem down here before there are any leaves. What I'm going to do, this would root without rooting powder, but what we can do is to put this in water and then a little rooting powder. Rooting powder just makes it root quicker. Stick that down in like that, right up to the sand and the level of those first leaves, and press it in firmly. All right, that's how you do a basil. And the rest of these things are very much the same way. We have here a cutting of the phlox. Now what I do with something like this is simply to pull off those leaves like so. I like to pinch out the tip because I'm not interested in that cutting growing straight out. I'd like to make side stems. Again, we'll dip a little bit of rooting powder if that wasn't quite wet enough, a little water, a little rooting powder, and again, this will sit down in the sand just about to the level of the first leaf. That's all there is to rooting that. Now, it looks as if making plants from cuttings is very easy. And let me convince you, it is extremely easy to do so. Now here we have the lavender cotton. Again, something that you can root just no time at all. Just little stems, in this instance about 2 inches long, 2.5 inches long. Hold it between your thumb and finger. Peel off some of those lower leaves. We don't want to get them. Moisten it, put a little bit of powder on it. We'll stick that down in the sand. Now, you can see it's no great problem to do that. Now, I should say that we have one last thing. We have to take care of humidity on here. And so, you've seen me put plants inside of plastic bags, such as that. One thing about it, when you use the plastic bag, sometimes the bag clings to the leaves and the leaves stay wet and you can get some rot. What I've made here is just a little homemade cover made of plastic and wood, slips right over the top. Now we have a perfect tent. This wants to go in a place where it's warm, about 70 to 75 degrees, where there is plenty of light but no full sun or you'll cook them. All right, now you know how to make cuttings and you can start so many different kinds of plants that very way. Now, let's go from there and talk about some of these poinsettias that we made cuttings of a number of months ago. And you see, this is what we're talking about. These handsome young plants, rooted from the old plant which flowered last Christmas. Now we have them. What you can do is to simply keep one plant in a pot and grow up about so tall and blossom. What I'm going to do instead is to grow 3 plants in a pot, the same way that you would expect to find them from a flower shop. Put a little soil in here. We'll slip these 3 plants rather close together in a single container. Nice roots beginning to show. These. We want to handle these with as much care as you can because you know this kind of a plant loses white sap from any cut that's made on its stem. Slip a 3rd one into there. Already you see it looks as though we have a poinsettia that's starting for Christmas time. Now comes that big question, how are you going to get this poinsettia to blossom at Christmas time? If you've tried them before in the house, they get nothing but leaves. They have to have longer nights than days, and that's the whole secret. So do this. Get a cover of some kind which is absolutely impervious to light, and this is an old wastebasket. At 5 o'clock every afternoon, drop it right over the top like that. At 7 or 8 o'clock the next morning, every day, take it off like this. Sunshine and short days, darkness and long nights, and you will get blossoms at Christmas time. You can do the same thing with this plant called the kalanchoe. Also, if you cover that at night, you'll get your blossoms at Christmas time. Now we come to that paper white narcissus. These are the bulbs which will make the blossoms, which will flower for us now in November. Look for hard bulbs, firm bulbs like this. You can plant them in sand or soil. I'm going to use just ordinary pebbles. Simply put them in like that, and the pebbles supply just the physical support so that the bulbs don't topple over. Now, it used to be that I and many other people recommended setting these bulbs in complete darkness until they formed roots. We've discovered since, I found out that they will do better if they go right onto a bright windowsill in the coolest room in your house. You have to keep them moist. So add water until in the beginning you can see the water just up halfway on the bulbs. There we have them. Water around there. This can go on a windowsill. They'll make short, stubby, dark green growth, and they'll blossom when they're about so tall instead of those tall, tall blossoms. Well, now let's see if we can get a couple of questions answered today. This is part of the fun time of the program as far as I'm concerned. A lady in Sausalito, California writes, I have an apricot tree that has the best tasting apricots. The tree is very old, and now I would like to know how to propagate it. Any help? You bet. This next spring, see if you can get some seedling peach or apricot trees. Then next June, we'll show you how to bud them. So you watch, we'll be doing a budding operation, and you can start any number of young trees from that older one that you have. From Larchmont, New York, is it possible to grow flowering dogwood trees from the dogwood berries which are now beginning to ripen? Yes. Plant them in good soil with a lot of organic matter in it. After the berries are ripe in the fall, these berries have to have 4 months of temperatures below 40 degrees before they'll sprout. So plant them after they're ripe. They'll be up for you next spring. What do I do with my tuberous begonias now that frost is coming? Well, let's look at a tuberous begonia. Now, when the frost comes, of course, it will knock those tops right down to the ground. But down at the base of the soil, you perhaps can see the tuba for which this plant gets its name, the tuberous begonia. After the tops die down by the frost, dig the bulbs out and let them dry in a shady place for about 2 weeks. Then put those bulbs in a bag of dry peat moss or dry vermiculite or dry sawdust. What I'm saying is the material has to be dry. Put it in a place about 45 degrees. Next March will be the time to start planting them for another season of bloom. From New York City, I have a piece climbing rose in a 10-inch clay pot on my 9th floor balcony. What shall I do with it over winter? Well, in that environment, it would surely die if you leave it outdoors, so I would bring mine right inside immediately so that it can get all that winter protection. Here's one from Onset, Massachusetts. Last spring, I bought a 1-foot-tall tree tomato, which I planted outdoors. It's grown to be 5 feet. Must I bring it in the house in the fall? Yes, this could grow only in Florida or places such as that. It's not a tomato. You have to bring it inside. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Now, next week, we're going to be planting spring flowering bulbs alongside the greenhouse, where we now have some annuals which are fading fast. We're going to divide a peony. Time of the year is September. And then I must remind you that this is the right time to buy your bulbs of spring flowering bulbs, because spring is just around the corner. I'm Jim Crockett in Crockett's Victory Garden. I hope you enjoy the program every week.